Emperor Paul. I went down in history as one of the most controversial figures of the Russian monarchy. His reign was marked by bold reforms and dark sides that provoked mixed reactions among the public and the nobility. The son of Catherine the Great, Paul found himself in a difficult situation. He had to not only retain power, but also transform the state based on his own ideas of order and justice. However, his aspirations clashed with the powerful interests of the court and the upper echelons, who were accustomed to the old order. Upon ascending the throne at the end of the 18th century, Paul I began with harsh measures intended to strengthen discipline and bring order to the state apparatus. He reduced the influence of his favorites and restricted the freedom of the nobility to think freely, which ultimately significantly reduced the emperor's popularity. Constant control over the army and the introduction of new regulations caused discontent among the military and courtiers, some of whom believed that the sovereign was too authoritarian and unpredictable in his decisions. His personal life and habits were also subject to close scrutiny and mixed reviews. Paul loved strictness in everyday life and adhered to strict rules and norms of etiquette, which many perceived as excessive despotism. Combined with his mystical fascination with Freemasonry and interest in various esoteric practices, rumors and speculation began to swirl around his personality. It is believed that it was this side of his character that heightened fear and suspicion among the upper echelons of society. Paul's power seemed dangerous to many because of his unpredictable decisions and impulses toward reforms that could overturn the established world of the elite. He restricted the participation of foreigners in state affairs and banned a number of traditional customs, which caused discontent in diplomatic circles and among aristocratic families closely associated with European dynasties. His policies weakened the position of the old power groups, which only exacerbated tensions in the state. It is worth mentioning Paul's relationship with Masonic lodges and secret societies, which were popular among the nobility and statesmen of the time. On the one hand, he himself showed an interest in mysticism, while on the other, his reforms aroused fears and doubts, giving rise to rumors of a struggle for influence between secret circles. Some historians suggest that a real game of powerful forces unfolded around the emperor, with the parties seeking to use him or eliminate him as a threat to their own interests. The circumstances surrounding the palace coup that ended Paul Verne's life are just as mysterious. Officially, his death was blamed on a group of nobles, but some say that Freemasons, British intelligence, and secret societies worried about a possible shift in the global balance of power were involved. The intriguing details of this story are still the subject of debate and prompt new investigations, as the motives of those involved remain hidden behind a complex veil of political games. Pavel's portrait is made up of many contradictions: an unyielding reformer, a strict and petty despot, a man of mystical aspirations and political cunning. He tried to break old traditions and raise the country to a new level, but his actions alienated many allies and strengthened his enemies. His desire for order and justice was intertwined with the dark aspects of power, which inspired fear and misunderstanding. When reflecting on Paul's reign, it is impossible to ignore the influence of European politics at the time. Russia stood at the crossroads of major imperial interests, and every change in Moscow could affect the balance of power in Europe. This is why the figure of the emperor attracted particular attention, and his attempts to make St. Petersburg, the center of the new power, were accompanied by a tense struggle for influence with foreign and internal forces. Control over the army and diplomacy became a key issue that not everyone could understand and accept. The mystery of Paul Verne's death still holds many secrets. How would Russian history have unfolded if the emperor had been able to continue his reforms without hindrance? Perhaps the historical landscape would have been completely different. But reality turned out differently. A palace coup brought his era to an unexpected and violent end, opening a new chapter in the life of the empire, filled with intrigue and power struggles. The shadows of these events still linger on the pages of history, raising questions and speculation. As we continue to explore this fascinating period, it is worth paying attention to those who stood by Paul in his final days, his close associates and traitors. Their roles in the conspiracy and their relationships with the emperor reveal the internal conflict that was playing out behind the scenes of power. It was their motives and actions that played a decisive role in the monarch's fate, creating a drama that is difficult to understand without a thorough analysis of political and personal factors. It is these events that lead us to deeper secrets and mysteries. Moving further along this path of discovery, we will delve deeper into the atmosphere of those days when every word and deed mattered to the history of the country. The following chapters will allow you to learn the details of the palace coup, examine different versions and rumors, and try to understand the real role played by secret societies and external players. The story of Paul I is not just a tale of the past, it is the key to understanding many mysteries and lessons that are still relevant today. The death of Paul I is officially considered the result of a palace coup that took place at the end of the 19th century. On that night, conspirators, consisting of people close to the emperor, decided to end his reign by force, believing that in doing so, they would save Russia from internal chaos and despotism. This coup was not a spontaneous act of violence, but rather a carefully planned operation dictated by fears about the monarch's political course and his growing conflicts with the elite. Despite his desire for reform, Emperor Paul found himself doomed to conflict with the nobility and the high military command. His harsh methods of government and constant changes in the court and military structures caused discontent and even fear among those who feared losing their influence and wealth. The conspirators claimed that their actions were necessary to maintain stability in the state and prevent further deterioration of the political situation. It was a struggle to preserve the old order in a period of rapid change and the looming threat of external conflicts. Intrigue and false rumors accompanied Paul's reign from the very beginning, and on the night of the coup, the palace corridors were filled with tension and fear. Among the organizers of the conspiracy were Grand Duke Constantine, the emperor's nephew, and several high-ranking generals who had their own motives for participating in the rebellion. Their goal was not personal revenge, but to establish control over the throne with minimal losses for the country. The conspirators believed that removing Paul would pave the way for a more stable political era under a new monarch. Detailed accounts of the events of that night describe how the conspirators broke into Mikhailovsky Castle, where the emperor lived. Doctors and courtiers described scenes of panic and desperate struggle. Paul was arrested and, unconscious, taken to one of the small rooms where he died. The official version claims that death was caused by suffocation and blows, but the circumstances surrounding the incident left room for doubt and mystery. Some claimed that the emperor tried to avoid violence, hoping for mercy due to his royal authority, but the forces were unequal. The motives of the conspirators were revealed in subsequent investigations conducted by the new government. The main reason was Paul's unwillingness to make concessions to the higher nobility and the military, as well as his unpredictability in international politics. The emperor sought to strengthen his influence by subjugating the army and changing the system of state councils, which greatly annoyed traditionalists. It was this tension that served as the spark for the palace coup. Historians note that Alexander Benkendorf played a key role in the coup, as he was one of the main coordinators of the conspiracy. His influential connections and persuasiveness made him one of the central figures in the conspiracy, and one of the organizers of the subsequent regime. He represented a group of people for whom not only power was important, but also the preservation of political and social stability in Russia. Benkendorf and his allies did not want radical change. They sought a return to more familiar forms of government. An important aspect of the coup was the quick overthrow of Paul and the transfer of power to his son, who ruled under the name Alexander III. This move let the conspirators make their actions legal and avoid most of the criticism from the public and foreigners. Alexander took the throne with promises of reform, but kept many of his predecessors' political positions. Thus, the palace coup was not simply a change of ruler, but a transitional stage in the development of the Russian political system. Despite the official versions, rumors and speculations about the possible involvement of foreign powers and secret societies continued to circulate in the years that followed. However, the direct documentation of those events remains sparse and contains no evidence to support such theories. Nevertheless, the palace coup remains one of the most mysterious and dramatic episodes in Russian history, attracting the attention of researchers to this day. Official documents emphasize exclusively internal conflicts, explaining the actions of the conspirators by their royal ambitions and the difficulties of the era. While maintaining historical objectivity, it is impossible not to notice that the personality of Paul I and his style of rule were unusual for his time. His desire for reform and personal cruelty evoked mixed feelings. He was a ruler who tried too hard to change the established order, which exacerbated intra-class contradictions. As a result, the palace coup became a kind of reaction to attempts to change the balance of power, which ended tragically for the emperor himself. Thus, the classic interpretation of Paul I's fate boils down to an internal palace conflict caused by the elite's dissatisfaction with his policies and methods of government. The coup was a carefully planned move by influential circles who wanted to regain control and prevent potential chaos. This explains the motivation and actions of the conspirators, who considered themselves saviors of the state and their traditional power. Ahead of us lies the study of alternative theories and mysteries surrounding this dark page in Russian history. The events of the night of March 23, 1811, are shrouded in mystery and secrets, like a fabric woven from the most intricate patterns by invisible hands. The official version of the palace coup, according to which Paul I fell victim to a conspiracy of opposition nobles, only lifts the veil on the true nature of what happened. However, if you look more closely, details and symbols that at first glance seem random suddenly take on meaning, like echoes of ancient cults and Masonic orders intertwined with the secret game of world powers. In the palace where the drama unfolded, traces of Masonic influence can be found even in the smallest details. Some witnesses recalled that on the night of the murder, mysterious symbols resembling Masonic symbols flickered mysteriously on the cornices and chandeliers. Similar emblems, compasses and gloves, eyes in triangles, glided invisibly across the halls, like reminders of the presence of secret societies. It is no coincidence that among the conspirators and those close to Paul, there was a noticeable concentration of people associated with lodges. Their meaning is not only political, but also deeply esoteric, since such symbols were intended to influence the subconscious, strengthen the spirit, and unite people in a common purpose. According to some sources, British intelligence was not just an observer, but an active player in this complex spectacle. The British, skilled at concealing their actions under the cover of night, are said to have passed secret instructions to the conspirators using special signs marked on letters and everyday objects. Historians and researchers note mysterious crosses and dots that could be seen at the meeting places of the conspirators. They served as a kind of navigation in the darkness of betrayal, indicating the time and place for agents. Thus, symbols became not just decoration, but a tool, an encrypted code for secret actions. Interestingly, the presence of Masonic symbols was not limited to the moment of the coup, but can also be traced in the documents of Paul I himself. It is known that the emperor was deeply interested in esoteric sciences and religious movements, which may have caused concern among the world's elites. Some of his instructions in letters contained complex allegories and symbols that were only understandable to a select few. This gave reason to believe that Paul wanted not only to strengthen his power, but also to influence secret societies and change the balance of power in the world, which was an unforgivable sin for them. Such speculations are reinforced by stories of special rituals that took place in the secret halls of the palace long before that fateful night. Witnesses claimed that the walls were decorated with unusual patterns and figures combining Masonic and alchemical symbols. At night, people dressed in robes gathered there to perform a ritual whose purpose remains a mystery to this day. For some, it was a symbol of the protection of truth and order. For others, a demonstration of the power of forbidden knowledge. All this points to a level of intrigue that ordinary palace struggles could not penetrate. No less mysterious is the behavior of Paul himself in the last period of his life. He seemed to sense the impending danger, and in his letters asked his relatives to keep the secrets hidden behind the facades of power. The emperor's opponents, aware of his penchant for secret societies, tried to distort any symbols or actions, turning them into grounds for accusations and ultimatums. Thus, every symbol in the palace became an act of disobedience or a threat, revealing deep rifts between the open authorities and the shadow structures. It is also worth mentioning the role of Masonic lodges, whose channels of influence extended far beyond St. Petersburg and Moscow. The conspirators used their connections with European orders, through which money, information, and even foreign agents passed, to increase the effectiveness of their plan to overthrow the emperor. Such international connections indicate that the struggle against Paul was not merely domestic, but had global undertones. In this context, symbols became a universal language, understandable only to the initiated, but frightening to those around them. Researchers are particularly interested in the scenario in which Paul was being prepared for resignation and subsequent elimination, not only as a ruler, but also as the bearer of a different worldview. His desire for reform and his isolation from the traditional elites threatened to destroy the old structures. The symbols in this narrative became manifestations of a struggle for power, not so much on a political level as on a mystical one, where the interests of different forces and worldviews intersected. It is this multi-layered nature that creates the aura of mystery surrounding the events of the coup. Thus, an analysis of the surviving evidence indicates that the palace coup was a much more complex and multidimensional process than it appears at first glance. Symbols and secret signs played the role of beacons in a world of shadows, uniting the conspirators and guiding their actions in the right direction. The interaction between the Freemasons, British intelligence, and other secret societies created an invisible network that could not be penetrated by the ordinary observer. In this invisible spectacle, Paul turned out to be a key figure whose fate became a victim not only of political intrigue, but also of the struggle for sacred knowledge and power. We are presented with a picture where every sign and symbol has a special meaning and reveals the hidden meanings of history. Understanding this allows us not only to accept the facts as truth, but also to see the depth and complexity of the mystery that still excites the minds of researchers and lovers of secrets. Pavel's behavior and actions, shrouded in mystery, open the door to further events, where questions of power, mysticism, and human destiny intertwine. At this moment, history seems to freeze on the edge of dimensions, where the past and the future merge into one sign, inviting us to look behind the scenes of the official versions. The next stage will reveal further mysteries and intrigues, continuing our journey through the labyrinth of palace coups and secret societies, where nothing is accidental and every detail has its own, sometimes terrifying, meaning. The death of Paul remains one of the most mysterious pages in Russian history, and historians still argue about the reasons for his demise. The official version tells us about a palace coup organized by a group of Russian aristocrats outraged by the emperor's harsh policies. However, a much more complex and intriguing picture lies behind the scenes of this tragedy. The focus is on secondary but very influential players, Masonic lodges and British intelligence, whose role may have gone far beyond simply observing events in one of Europe's great monarchies. In those years, John Billings, the future treasurer and influential Freemason, was already working closely with representatives of the English secret services, who were trying to strengthen their influence in Russia through political intrigue and support for certain circles at court. Freemasonry was not just a secret brotherhood with mystical rituals. It was a network capable of controlling the destinies of states by uniting people with common political goals at the international level. Access to key figures and influence over decision-making created fertile ground for dirty games, and Paul could become too inconvenient for such forces. The political climate at the end of the 18th century was tense. Europe was on the verge of great changes. Revolutions, wars, and shifting alliances turned every step on the international stage into a dangerous game. Pavel, known for his impulsive and sometimes unpredictable actions, tried to pursue his own policy, which threatened both the traditional aristocratic circles of Russia and the European elite. His policy of rapprochement with France and harsh measures against counter-revolutionaries caused concern in London and among the Freemasons, for whom stability and control were an integral part of success. There is a version that through Masonic networks, British intelligence was able to penetrate almost all spheres of power in Russia, obtaining timely information and influencing decisions. These agents used not only espionage, but also psychological methods to sow discord among Paul's allies, prepare a conspiracy, and bring about his overthrow. An important episode was the arrival in St. Petersburg of an English diplomat who conducted secret negotiations with the organizers of the palace coup, selling his support with promises of new benefits for Britain. The Freemasons were not a homogeneous community. Their ranks included both supporters of reform and enlightenment, and conspiracy theorists who wanted to create a new world order according to their own rules. For many of them, Paul was a symbol of threat, an authoritarian and unpredictable ruler capable of destroying existing international agreements and undermining the power of secret societies. His death could have been a calculated act aimed at maintaining the balance of power between open politics and the hidden games of the elite, where human existence was the price to pay. Contemporary research reveals surprising documents from British intelligence at the time, which mention the intrigues surrounding the Russian ruler, his isolation, and the psychological pressure exerted on his inner circle. The British notes hint that the palace coup was carefully planned and coordinated not only within Russia, but also at the international level. This information suggests that Paul was the victim of a carefully staged spectacle in which the intervention of the Freemasons and the British proved decisive. We should not forget the individuals closely involved in the intrigue. Alexander Suvorov, the greatest military leader, remained loyal to his emperor, but his opportunities in the political game were limited. Some of Paul's associates, frightened by his reforms and methods of government, could have become tools in the hands of secret societies and foreign intelligence services. Their motivation was mixed with ideology and fear, which often becomes a breeding ground for conspiracies. The secrets they carried with them have not yet been fully revealed, but their role was undoubtedly significant. All this was compounded by an atmosphere of constant fear and mistrust at court. Paul was accused of paranoia and a tendency to see enemies around him, but it is possible that this was fueled by real conspiracies and increased surveillance. Historians believe that it was this internal situation that made the coup inevitable, and Masonic connections and the influence of British intelligence turned it into an international scandal. The alliance between the Freemasons and British intelligence in this story looks like both allies and enemies playing their own game. The question of whether Paul was really too dangerous for the world elite remains open. His reformist ideas could have changed not only Russia, but the whole world. And perhaps it was the fear of these changes that became the spark that led to the tragic events. Masonic lodges and British intelligence, moving along their secret lines, controlled the political map of Europe and decided that it would be more convenient to see a more predictable ruler on the throne. It was a merciless lesson in history, in which truth is intertwined with legend. Thus, the intrigues and secrets of the palace coup are revealed only through careful analysis and consideration of international interrelationships. Immersing ourselves in this mysterious atmosphere, we see how complex alliances and hidden influences change the course of history, rather than simply a struggle for the throne on Russian soil. Memories of PaulI remain not only as a cruel ruler, but also as a man whose fate was intertwined with the great forces that ruled the world from the shadows. This story is only beginning to reveal its secrets to us, and in the next chapter, we will continue to explore a new side of his fate and personal tragedy. Paul I is an ambiguous and mysterious figure whose death is still shrouded in mystery and speculation. Officially, it is referred to as a palace coup, but historians and conspiracy theorists believe that behind these events lies a much more complex game played by interested forces. Paul was perceived as a threat, not only to his subjects and courtiers, but also to the entire European elite, who closely watched his every move and made decisions based on their own interests. This raises the question, could he have become too dangerous for the entire world power system? From an early age, Paul showed an independent character and a desire to reform the established order. After ascending to the throne, he immediately set about revising numerous laws and established rules, trying to bring the state apparatus into line with his own ideas of justice and discipline. His strict instructions on reforming the army and the bureaucratic apparatus were perceived as a challenge to the traditional elites, who were accustomed to privileges and unlimited influence over the government. Paul clearly sought to strengthen central power by revising the aristocracy's efforts to maintain the status quo. The emperor paid particular attention to foreign policy. Unlike his predecessors, Paul was cautious in his relations with France and other kingdoms that played a key role on the European stage. His desire to build alliances, sometimes unconventional and unexpected, caused alarm among the British monarchy and a number of secret societies that traditionally controlled the political balance of power in Europe. There are speculations that Paul may have deliberately sought to weaken the traditional hegemons, which made him a dangerous and unpredictable figure. Such changes rarely happen without resistance. Historians note that the atmosphere around the emperor became increasingly tense, and the circle of people interested in limiting his power expanded. Rumors spread in court circles about a conspiracy supported by Freemasons and intelligence services whose interests directly conflicted with Paul's policies. These groups saw him as an obstacle capable of changing the balance of power in the world and undermining their influence. All this created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion around the court. Interestingly, some of Paul's persecutors had knowledge of secret rituals and symbols, which further fueled conspiracy theories. The use of Masonic symbols and architectural allusions in St. Petersburg at that time is seen as a sign of a hidden struggle for power. The appearance of such elements near the emperor's residence indicates that the confrontation was not only political, but also psychological, with the game for control and influence involving methods of suggestion and secret messages. A key element in Paul's fate was his reforms aimed at democratizing the army and creating a military service free from corruption and nepotism. This was a real threat to the generals, who were accustomed to absolute control and frequent abuses. In addition, seasonal campaigns and new orders regarding funds filled the atmosphere with mistrust and irritation among senior officials. As a result, resistance to the emperor took the form of a covert campaign aimed at overthrowing him and restoring the old order. In European politics, Paul showed a desire to create a powerful alliance against Napoleon, which contradicted the interests of those who preferred to see Russia as a more restrained participant. His friendship with England and his attempts to establish relations with other nations drew criticism and discontent among influential circles who feared Russia's growing strength as a geopolitical player. These circumstances only exacerbated tensions and intensified fears about his rule. Despite all this, we must not forget the human side of Paul. He was a complex personality with a strong character who did not tolerate betrayal or treachery. Because of this, his circle of confidants was limited, which made him vulnerable to outside influences. The danger of his reforms and policies lay precisely in their unexpectedness and abruptness, which led to the formation of secret plots and conspiracies by those who sought to retain power at any cost. Ultimately, a palace coup culminated in the growing conflict between the emperor and the elites, who united in a secret coalition to remove Paul. But even now, more than 2 centuries later, questions surrounding his death remain alive, sparking debate and speculation. Who was behind the conspiracy, and was Paul's death inevitable? The answers to these questions are hidden in the depths of history and mysterious archives that require further study. Soon, we will delve into the mysterious circumstances surrounding the emperor's final hours to understand exactly how his fate was sealed and what secrets it holds. You are in for an immersion into a world of intrigue, betrayal, and mystery surrounding the events that forever changed the course of Russian history. The mystery of Paul Vern's death is surrounded by many legends and mysteries, as if a mystical aura has formed around this tragedy. The official version of the palace coup seems too mundane to explain the complex relationships surrounding the Russian emperor. Let's take a deeper look at the theories involving secret societies, Masonic rituals, and foreign intelligence interference. One of the most intriguing assumptions is that Paul Vern became involved in a complex game played by the Freemasons. His unpredictable behavior and attempts at reform could have seriously disrupted the plans of the powerful elite. It is known that the emperor was interested in esotericism, esoteric knowledge, and even secret symbols. His passion for mysticism could not go unnoticed and may have been the cause of discontent among influential circles. An important element of such theories is the story of mysterious messages found in his chambers after his death. They contain hints of secret revenge, intricate Masonic conspiracies, and strange symbols incomprehensible to the average person. These writings seem to confirm that forces beyond the realm of ordinary politics were at work in Paul's fate. There is a view that British intelligence was actively involved in Russian affairs during this period. Paul was very careful in his political moves, and his attempts to bring Russia closer to France caused concern in London. According to some sources, British agents may have provoked the events that led to the assassination by organizing a network of secret connections and influence among courtiers. The figure of one of the conspirators, Major General Bennigsen, remains no less mysterious. He is surrounded by numerous rumors and speculations about his mystical knowledge and ability to manipulate destinies. His role in the conspiracy may have been more than just military. He was probably a link between secret societies and the imperial entourage. Significant attention is paid to the possible involvement of Masonic lodges in organizing the coup. Freemasons at that time actively influenced political processes throughout Europe, skillfully managing hidden communications and conspiracies. For them, the elimination of Paul could have been part of a larger plan to control Russia and its resources. Sometimes these theories mention the presence of strange astrological coincidences surrounding the date of the emperor's death. It is noted that the night when Paul fell had a special energetic characteristic according to ancient calendars, which could have given the events a sacred connotation. It is believed that the mysterious signs and symbols allegedly left at the scene of the crime are far from accidental. Another version considers the possibility of a ritual murder aimed at changing the course of history. According to this version, Paul's death was part of an ancient ritual aimed at gaining power and control over Russia. This theory is supported by some documents and testimonies of contemporaries that have survived to this day. The branches of these mystical assumptions are intertwined with the real political intrigues and ambitions of those who wanted to see Russia ruled from outside. The role of secret societies in history is inseparable from the memory of Paul, for he was the victim of a successful and carefully planned operation involving secrecy and deception. We cannot forget the emperor's personal qualities. His stubbornness, desire for reform, and inability to compromise were a catalyst for those who saw him as a threat to stability. In this complex game, the magic of influence that surrounded him played a role, and it may have been as decisive as the cold calculation of the conspirators. It is difficult to untangle these layers of historical mystery, but it is precisely in them that part of the truth about the death of Paul Thurns lies hidden. Each theory has its own nuance, and perhaps the truth combines several aspects at once, giving the story depth and mystical richness. The emperor's death becomes not just an event, but a true symbol of the struggle between light and darkness, power and secret forces. In concluding this overview, it cannot be overlooked that the mystery of Paul Thurns' death remains one of the most enigmatic in Russian history. It continues to attract researchers with its hidden signs and intrigues that extend far beyond the palace walls. And now we move on to the next stage, where we will examine the influence of Paul's personality on the subsequent history of Russia and the consequences of his death. Paul, I was not just a ruler of Russia. He was a man with an unusual view of power and order. His reign lasted only 7 years, but the consequences of his death were far from short-lived. The official version states that Paul died as a result of a palace coup planned by supporters of his son Alexander. However, legends and secret conversations leave many questions that cannot be answered unequivocally. After the emperor's death, Russia found itself at a crossroads. Alexander III, upon ascending the throne, was forced to navigate between preserving traditions and the need for reform. However, according to many historians, his reign was unable to completely remove the shadow left by his father's death. In the mirror of time, Paul's death is perceived not only as a dynastic tragedy, but also as a symbol of the struggle for the fate of the country. Among the key questions that are still debated today is who exactly was behind the conspiracy. Some blame court conspirators eager to end tyrannical rule. Others lean toward the idea of foreign interference. Freemasons, British intelligence, and secret societies feature in these theories for a reason. Many are still convinced that Paul's death was part of a global game with much larger goals. Paul was considered too independent and inconvenient for many in the upper echelons of power. His strange whims, harsh punishments, and attempts to reform the army and the court caused discontent. He was not afraid to challenge the established order, which meant he was a threat not only to certain groups within the Tsar's entourage, but also to international players. His reforms could have changed the balance of power in Europe, which caused alarm among the British and other elites. Another mystery is how exactly Paul died. According to official documents, he was strangled during the coup, but the details of this event differ in various sources. There is evidence that the conspirators used cunning methods to hide the true cause of his death. Some researchers note that the emperor's body was not thoroughly examined, and the circumstances of his death were censored in official documents. The legacy of Paul Thurns raises many questions, not only among historians, but also among ordinary people interested in history. His fate has become the subject of works of art, secret stories, and even mystical theories. Some claim that his spirit still haunts the land, reflecting the turmoil of historical events and the injustice he may have experienced during his lifetime. Historical documents relating to Paul's reign and death were among the most secret in Russian history. Only in the last century have researchers been able to study the archives more openly, leading to new hypotheses and a re-examination of old versions. Each new document adds details, but rarely provides definitive answers, prompting more and more people to delve into the study of this period. The influence of Paul's death on world politics is still felt today. His era was a time of change, and his death symbolized a change of elites and strategies. It is believed that it was after his death that a new phase of diplomatic games began, in which the confrontation between Masonic lodges and secret societies came to the fore. These hidden battles for power sometimes influenced the fate of entire countries and peoples. In Russia, Paul's death became a kind of warning about the price to be paid for attempting to reform a complex system. His death was a lesson for subsequent monarchs and politicians, reminding them that the struggle for power is always fraught with intrigue and danger. It was because of this event that Alexander the First began to carefully build his policy, trying to avoid his father's mistakes. The mystery surrounding the death of Paul I has many layers. Beyond what is known from official reports, there is a lot of subtle evidence that points to deeper secrets. Sometimes it seems that there is something more behind the usual palace coup. Comparing different versions, one can see how historical intrigues unfolded and who could have played a key role in them. Beyond the political consequences, Paul's personal fate and the circumstances of his death raise questions about the fragility of human existence, especially when confronted with the harsh reality of power. His family, especially Alexander the First, went through a painful period that left its mark on their characters and decisions. Stories about how these events affected those close to the emperor are no less interesting than his death itself. Contemporary research is opening new chapters in the study of Paul's personality and his reign. As new documents emerge, scholars are increasingly inclined to believe that his death was the result of a complex conspiracy involving both internal intrigues and external interests. It is this duality that makes the mystery so appealing to historians and lovers of mysticism. The ambiguity and confusion surrounding the death of Paul I create a unique space for reflection on the nature of power and justice. It is here that the shadows of the past and the questions of the present converge. Secret societies and conspiring elites leave their mark, sometimes almost imperceptible, but all the more significant for it. This story teaches us to look more closely at sources and remember that the truth is always more complicated than it seems. Thus, the legacy of Paul I is not simply a story about the tragic fate of a monarch. It is a mirror reflecting the complex intertwining of politics, mysticism, and human destinies. His death was not only a historical fact, but also a symbol of the struggle for power, freedom, and truth in a changing world. Understanding these events helps us to better comprehend not only Russia's past, but also many mysteries that continue to stir the human spirit. When discussing the consequences of Paul's death, we encounter questions that remain open today. Why did he find himself in the path of the most powerful forces? How seriously did his reforms threaten the world's elites? The answers to these questions are not simple, and this is what makes the story of Paul I unique in human memory.